and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, a man who maybe should have waited for the Horadrim before heading into those caves.
Tim Longo.
Did you find that book, by the way? There's a book there that explains, don't go after the Lord of Terror without the Horadrim.
I have found a couple books that talk about the Sin War and a few. I don't know. I wonder if we find the same books every time. I did find one that mentioned the Horadrim. Yeah. It didn't say not to go after him. It sort of talked about how the Horadrim used soul stones to capture them, and Diablo got away and went to the west. But then they eventually got him and trapped him in a soul stone deep beneath a cathedral. Which I think
I thought that was the same one that said don't disturb him.
It could have. Maybe I missed it. Yeah, I could have missed it. You got that one, though, too?
I got that one, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly where. I thought it was in the caves, but
I think
I'm thinking ahead to the end of the game and the final cutscene, and just like we won't talk about that this time, but I remember it.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but being a medium-sized fan of this franchise, just kind of a Blizzard nut. I remember the opening cinematic of Diablo 2 and how those two go together, and just being so blown away by that. This concept, that. Anyway, we won't.
Now I don't remember the beginning of Diablo 2 at all.
Well, we can talk about it at the end. It's because
they're going to the east, maybe.
Yeah,
he's in the desert and stuff. Yeah.
Well, and it has to do with how they trap him this time,
right?
Yeah.
Yep. So I do remember it. I just
really
forgot.
neat conceit, for sort of like how Diablo keeps surviving and how he keeps moving and stuff. So, yeah.
I like it when series tied, installments and series tie themselves together like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, when the end of Kingdom Hearts post-credits scene is the beginning scene of Chain of Memories.
You're right. That's a perfect example. How's that going, Brett?
I actually finished
You did?
First playthrough. So it's
first.
What even is this game? Well, I'll say first playthrough. Although is it really the first playthrough? It's what I thought the first playthrough was going to be. I leveled up Sora to level 99. I fought the final boss. And after that, there's a new game plus, which is Riku, where you now play the game as Riku, and the mechanics change up a little bit. And they add a new thing. They take out some stuff. Like this, it's a deck management game.
Nope.
When you play as Sora, where instead of a deck like most deck builders, where you shuffle every time you have to draw a card and you don't have any cards left, you shuffle, right? So Dominion's like that, and any number of games are like that.
Mm-hmm.
This and then of course, or Magic the Gathering, right? I mean, there you're working off of percentages that things are going to come up because you're going to have a hand and things like this. Here you just have the deck, and you have sort of a pointer into a spot in the deck. And you can move that pointer back or forward, so you can go towards the front of the deck or towards the end of the deck, and even loop around. But whenever you play a card, it comes out of the deck, and eventually you have to re-get the deck. But it's always in the same order, with a couple of exceptions. But your cards get taken out if you use them in certain ways and things like that. And they change that up a little bit when you play as, because you don't have to build your own deck when you play again as Riku. But it's like, if you want to get the whole story, Tim, you have to play through as Riku.
I'm getting cold sweats just thinking about what you were talking about. This is our audience. This is our Kingdom Hearts Minute, because Brett is going to be keeping us up to date on the journey, the adventure that he is on. So all this being said, you are going to play again as Riku, or are you going to move on to the next?
Yeah, I'm already about 30 levels in as his character out of the 99 levels, I guess, that they can be.
Okay.
So yeah, I've already played quite a lot. It's a crazy game. Not gonna lie, it's very crazy.
Is it filling in, like, are you getting stuff from it from like a story perspective? Is it
Yeah, because this
adding
is
to the
actually,
first one?
yeah. Now I understand why people say that the side games in this series tell as much or more of the story as the main games, um, because this one introduces this organization that
What?
is maybe up to something that's nefarious and maybe not. Maybe it seems like there's a schism maybe in this organization, which is ultimately will become Organization 13. That at least I know. Um,
What are
there,
you? An Organization
yeah,
13?
that's it, like they
Is this
go
turning into
even
Metal
deeper
Gear?
into like the Final Fantasy's end of things. You're just the one character in this game as well. You're not playing. Oh, in the story bits as Sora, you also have Donald and Goofy, so like in the cutscenes. But when you're actually going around in the levels, it's just Sora, and in the battles, it's just Sora. Though he can summon Goofy and Donald if their cards appear in the fights, which they normally do some percentage when you kill an enemy. But then when you play as Riku, you get Mickey.
Wait, what?
So you get Mickey as your partner in the battles if his cards show up.
Oh.
So it's pretty that part of it's pretty neat. And Mickey because Mickey was with Riku when they closed that door. They're still kind of together.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I was going to say they split up, so that
Right,
makes sense.
right, sort of. Anyway, I mean that's kind of why they came to this castle that it's all set in, which is called Castle Oblivion, and there's this young girl who can manipulate memories. Oh, it's just a whole thing, Tim. I don't even want
You can't see me right now, but I'm shaking my head. I'm shaking my
yeah.
head. It's like,
Okay, Metal Gear fan.
yeah, okay, fair
Okay,
enough.
Mister. I love how they tied the end of Diablo 1 to the beginning of Diablo 2. And even when you talk to King Leoric and in the other games, which is another thing we'll get to tonight. Anyway, I
Uh,
continue to play Kingdom Hearts games, fam. So we'll talk about that more in the future. But now we should get back to Diablo because we put that game behind us, and we're 7 minutes in. So we should.
it's yeah, we did put it behind us, but I have a feeling it's not the end of yeah.
Oh,
I I,
it's a
I
big
think
part of
it
my life now.
would be hilarious to keep to do the Kingdom Hearts minute update as you go. So
Okay.
yeah, keep us
Well,
posted.
I
But
will let you know when I've either platinumed this or moved on. I don't know. To platinum this game, you need to actually finish a different game. So it's just
what?
there's another game in this collection, right?
No,
There's 6 games,
are you serious?
and you have to finish the third game in order to get certain collectibles in the second game. And one of the, a
Is
couple of the trophies are based on having full collections of stuff, right? That's not uncommon.
is that
Um,
illegal? That's got to be illegal. You can't.
it's not because it's one title.
No.
It's
Oh, I
one
see.
title
They
with six platinum
retroactively.
trophies. Yeah, yeah. This wouldn't have been when they came out. This was a
Right,
Game
of
Boy
course.
game when it
This
came
didn't
out,
have.
and yeah,
Right.
no, this didn't have trophies. So
It's
all this
never
stuff
had.
got added in later. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that
all been
seems like a
retconned in.
technicality, though. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Oh, I
That
was a
seems
little annoyed when I looked it up. I'm like,
cheesy.
I have all these entries I haven't filled in the journal. What's the story with that? Because I know it's possible to get them all in the main game in the first game, but here in the second game, I'm like, this is really weird. I finished the game, but I've got or I'm about to finish the game. There's all this stuff I can't figure out what it is, and I go and I look. And it's like, oh no, you have to go finish 358/2, and then come back, and you'll be able to find these things. I'm like, what? What? So I don't know if
And
that's going to happen. I'll tell you. We'll see.
I think they're just playing a big practical joke on people. I think somebody's thinking to themselves, wouldn't it be hilarious if we
Mhm.
did this?
Yeah,
And
I
they're
just would
just
love to see what the Metal Gear Solid trophy lists look like.
no, there's none of that shenanigan. I mean, there's some nonsense, but anyway. All right, we'll move on. But
Yeah.
Diablo. Hey
Uh,
Diablo, we're coming for you.
yeah, we're on
The
our way.
best, the best to jump ahead a little bit. Did you go down to level 13?
I did not actually this time. I said because if I do, I'll be trying to find the exit up
Yeah.
to the town again. And I was like, I did because
Okay.
last time that was far away, and I dug around for a while, and I was like, okay, now I'm starting to kill half the level, so I'm not going to do
Yeah.
it. So I didn't do that this time.
I got lucky. It ended up being close. So
Uh,
I got back to town, but I won't spoil the line because when you go down to the level to the caves for the first time, right? He says, my character said something about it's
It's
starting to
getting hot. Yeah.
get hot. But the line that he says, the line that the sorcerer says when you get down to level 13 is hilarious. So I'll spoil that later. Yeah, so we played through the caves, 4 more levels, up to 12. And yeah, where do you want to start?
Let's start with the pacing stuff that we were talking about and the balancing having to
Yeah.
do with inventory and also weapons and the economy. Because that end of things we haven't talked about, but I do think is a big part of how this game feels to play, and honestly, some of the frustrations to play it. Some of that having to do with health potions and things like that for you, mana potions, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you have this limited inventory
Yeah.
that you literally have to lay out in the style of games of this era. I mean, many RPGs were like, well, we'll just limit how much stuff you can carry. I mean, Resident Evil is this way. We'll just limit how much stuff you can carry by how many boxes things take up. And I do remember Diablo 2 like improved it, had the same method, but improved it by letting you turn stuff sideways or something, like so that you didn't have to constantly reorganize.
There might have been an auto sort in that
Yeah, I
one.
think there was an auto sort as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
but maybe that was what would turn things sideways.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the main point that I wanted to bring up with the limited inventory that I think may not dawn on everybody because limited inventory systems like this one, specifically this one, because of its sort of iteration one of the essentially genre or style of game, people tend to get pretty frustrated by it because it's so limiting, and you feel like, oh, I just got down here, now my thing is full and my backpack's full, now I got to go back up. However, there is with the other thing about this game in particular, and any action RPG like this, is once you're in the dungeon, it is a very, I don't want to say flat. I mean, it's exciting, and addictive, but once you're down there, there's the pacing is pretty kind of, the ebbs and flows of the pacing don't get pretty, the troughs are not too deep, and the peaks aren't too high. They're pretty even, and you're having fun, right? And you're just in there and you're picking up stuff and you're killing dudes, but there's nothing to pull you out of that, right? And so the limited inventory, when you get full, unless you want to drop stuff, it forces you to go back to town to kind of reset your pacing, take a breath, and then go back in. And so if you imagine an unlimited inventory, though it does sound good in your head of like, of course, I would never have to stop. There is sort of inadvertent purpose to it that helps, in my opinion, helps the game, especially because they did such a good job, which I think we talked about in previous episode. They did such a good job with the feeling of the town being so tranquil and feeling so contrasting to the dungeon. And so when you go back in the dungeon, you have this anxiety start again because you've left this very peaceful, safe, tranquil area of the town, and then you go back in. And so that kind of going back and forth between these areas is really effective. But if you never go back to town, then you wouldn't feel that, that pacing change and that kind of tension change. So though limited inventories suck, there can be kind of a knock-on effect. That was my core point.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And the another thing that, of course, brings you back to town is the item durability, which we'll touch on in a moment. Sort of your equipment durability, I guess. The sort of peaks and valleys that you mentioned are sort of interesting to me because, of course, you're propelling yourself forward so that you kind of minimize the downtime when you're in the dungeon, and your peaks are basically either the named bosses or special quest type of stuff. Those are pretty much your peaks, which are often punctuated by that raindrop sound, for example, or just a drop. So something drops and you're like, oh, cool. I killed a named thing and I get this peak. But that actually leads to its own peak in town, which is when you actually go back and identify that thing. The further you go in the game, at least in playing a character that has no magic, I don't have an identify spell, and there are not a lot of identify scrolls after the first few levels because I think early on they seed the tables with more percentage drops for identify because you don't have a lot of money,
right?
And so later on, you've got plenty of money. I've got, tens of thousands of gold pieces or whatever. And it's nice to force me to go back to even get that identified. But that is itself, or can be a peak when you get something that's really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to use this right away. Or if you do find a quest completing item or something like that you can bring back, could be another peak. But you have to go back to town to do that as well. The other valley, I guess, would be when your durability runs low. So we can maybe dive into that. But I like thinking of that as the peaks and valleys. I was not sure where you were going to go with that topic, but that's a really important thing to do for players. I remember when we talked to Jill Murray, she talked about how we don't often let people down from the anxiety that we stir up, and this naturally has a way to do that, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, and it is a direct partnership with the music topic we talked about before, because the music really does a good job at mirroring the feeling of the area you are in, most notably, of course, the town. But then, as I've noticed, and we talked a little bit about when we talked about the music, as you go deeper and deeper, so far the music is just getting worse and worse when it comes to tension.
Yeah. How it makes you feel, for sure.
Yeah, just emotionally. And in the caves, there's even more groaning and just terrible sounds. And then, you get, and then
and a sort of discordant guitar now, more electric guitar, more reverb in that, more, I don't really have the musical tools to describe what's going on there, but there is more
minor chords and
more minor chords. Yeah. But also just more of that axe grindy stuff that heavy metal does, for example, without a lot of melody necessarily, but just like, when you drag the pick down the strings a little bit, you just get that, kind of sound, and things like that. I'm sure that has a term associated with it. I'm sure that's a technique. I don't know what it is.
The musicians are yelling at us right now.
Yeah. Yes. For those who want to know more about music, I recommend Kirk Hamilton's Strong Songs podcast, because he knows all of this stuff, and it's really fun to listen to. Anyway, plug for my friend.
Never heard that. Okay.
Very good.
Yeah, on the the thing that to switch over to how durability partners with some of this stuff as well. The thing once they embraced the real-time action-oriented nature of the game, where you are just going. It's not turn-based. You're not, in a sort of, I don't know, Ultima or gold box game way going back. Towns are not meant to just be quest areas, but there's actually a rhythm to that. And essentially this game has a series of resource sinks. And obviously that loop is heavily based on the loot dropping when it comes to gold, as well as items that you sell. But you have durability. Well, we already talked about backpack space. So you have that as a limited resource. You have durability of your weapons and your equipment, which is a limited resource, which you would need to go and replenish, as Brett said, to go back to town. You have mana and health. And all of that stuff kind of is in this cyclical nature. And then in my case, because I don't actually get hit that often, durability is not actually much of an issue for me. When I go back to town, most of my equipment it doesn't need much repair at all, because if I'm playing correctly, I'm not getting hit. I'm not getting near anything. I'm not even using my staff. The only reason I have my staff is to give me more magic points. I don't hit anything with it. And so my sink is really my mana, right? But, and I mean, yours is probably health, but also durability.
Health, and also the inventory space that takes up, right? Because I basically go back to town, fill up my backpack with potions, and for the most part, I leave some slots open in case there's stuff I can pick up when I go back. But yeah, I mean, it's basically there's that interplay between, I'm going to pull out money from my pack in order to buy things that take up individual slots per potion, in town. I basically fill up the bar, and then maybe a few columns full of potions in the backpack as well. And that's actually the one part of the auto placement pickup backpacking logic that I absolutely hate is that it stripes them along the bottom instead of putting them in columns,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which just makes no sense at all. They know that all their stuff is up and down. Um, anyway, that was the thing that was driving me a little crazy. Every time you buy a bunch of stuff, it's like, okay, now I got to go into my inventory and make space in my backpack. Um,
Well,
because we're both anal. I'm sure you do the
yeah.
same thing.
No, I do exactly the same thing. Well, the other interesting choice that they clearly were very intentional with was the fact that your money is also in your backpack.
Right.
In 5,000 gold increments. They could have made that any number. They didn't have to choose 5,000. And I have been not spending my money on much. And so I ended up with my whole bottom row full of just gold.
Oh my God. Wow.
And and I
I've
was
been
like,
buying stuff from the shop and just selling it back to see if good stuff came in the shop.
yeah, and like I said, I think last episode or something, that tends to be how I play. I don't tend to be very shop centric. And I find, especially in a seated game like this, I just kind of, unless I'm really like my gear is really under leveled or something, but I feel like I've been pretty lucky. And I've done what you said a couple times, and taken some stuff out to get some new stuff. But in a random loot game, I tend to not emphasize that because because I know it's random. I was like, well, I'll just see what the RNG gives me and roll with it. And then, as a quick aside, recently the best armor for a sorcerer, I think, dropped for me.
Oh, nice.
And which was super awesome moment, right? Because you get that unique item, and it's literally plate mail that has no strength requirements
Oh,
and
nice.
gives +2 magic, and like all resistances, 20% to all resistances. It's just insane. So, anyway, I got lucky. I like to brag about
Insane until we get to multiplayer,
that. Yeah, right.
where
Well,
there's a ladder of insanity.
I won't be able to use this character in multiplayer, right?
No, you won't. No.
right. Yeah, yeah.
No.
No, I know. It's like the chances of getting unique items in multiplayer are so low. But yeah, I mean, so it just, the sort of summary there is that everyone has essentially an economy resource sink, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's sort of an important requirement for the simplification of this game. If you kind of take it from sort of D&D standards or what have you, which typically does have things like encumbrance or space, or I'm not even talking about just computer games, but just in D&D in general, there's supposed to be some consideration for this stuff. You can't carry all of your gold,
Right.
depending on what your GM.
Yeah, and in D&D it serves a function to basically pull money out of the game so that they can't just overpower themselves at any point.
Right.
I've tended to ignore encumbrance and how much they can carry as far as that goes, just by not offering a lot of stuff they can spend it on. So the numbers are just going up, but there's nothing to buy. I let them buy certain types of equipment and tell them what, things are available, but it's usually a pretty short list. So I address it a different way. But I see your point, right? I mean, I'm basically just saying, okay, you can be as crazy rich, but there's just nothing to spend it on.
No, I think that's actually a pretty clever solution in my opinion, because encumbrance tends to be a negative reinforcement mechanic that people.
Yeah, it just slows down the game so much to be like, oh, now you're carrying. Yeah. What are you gonna do with that stuff that you picked up?
It just feels
you want to let exactly. You want to let them feel the reward of like, oh, I found this cool thing. It's like, well, yeah, okay, yeah, probably you shouldn't be able to carry 2 sets of armor. Like how much time do I really want to spend on that in a given week? So
yeah.
and usually stuff like that they actually just do it themselves. They just are like, oh, I'm just going to switch. I'm going to wear this other thing, and they don't attempt. But a lot of other things I just let go. It's like, how many spell books do you have? I don't care. You say you're carrying a whole library, big deal. So yeah, it's just how I approach it. But it's to avoid basically the Skyrim problem of like, oh, I've got all this stuff and now I can't move, which I never liked, even working on that game. So,
but to your point, like needing games like this, needing economy, / gold sinks is critical for the loop to work, because you need them to be spending. Ultimately, it all equates to gold. but you need them to be spending that as they're getting it, and so it's that kind of balance. Very, very tricky balance to get when it
Yeah.
comes to the tuning of those numbers. But I think one of the things about this particular game that I always appreciated is, and probably due to a lot of, playtesting and just kind of iteration that they did, I just feel like it's always been it's been for its era, it was a very well balanced game. It feels right on that line, of being the right power, but a little bit underpowered and feeling that tension, and then, like, well, you're spending a lot of your money. But and I ultimately do. I basically save my money for books because they're so expensive because I want more
Right.
spells.
Right. They're thousands. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where I bought a 27,000 book.
Oh my
7,000
goodness.
book. It's a
Wow.
level 4, level 4 book. It's called Bloodstar, I think. It's one of the enemies in Hell, I think, uses it that we haven't seen yet.
Oh, okay.
But the reason I got it, as a quick aside, is it is magic damage type. And I will tell the story later about how I met a random mini boss who was immune to both fire and lightning, which is, I hadn't found anything like that yet. And so I had to find a workaround. But if I'd had Bloodstar, which is a magic type, I hopefully could have done. So anyway, I wanted all 3 damage types basically.
Right. Right.
That's why I spent the money on this one. But we can get to immunities later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you know what? Let's just dive into them now. I mean, it's part of the enemy discussion that we wanted to have.
Yeah, that's true.
We've seen most of the enemies in the game at this point. There are going to be some others, I believe. But
there's a few
we've seen most of the stuff now. Of course, there's a number of things going on with enemies. Purely how they're done here. There's a lot of reskinning. You've got the Flesh Clan, the Stone Clan, the Night Clan, Goat Peoples. Oh, Flesh, Night, Stone. I feel like there's one more.
Goats.
Yeah, you've got the goats. You've got the different sort of lizard many, whatever those are supposed to be.
Yeah, the little guys on all fours. Yeah, those.
Oh no, I meant the upright ones down in the caves with the long tails.
With the long tails.
Maybe you didn't get these, right? There's golems.
There's a bunch of different golems, few different demon-like ones, right?
Yeah, I guess it's sort of maybe a demon. There's a demon that sort of looks like the cover of the old Player's Handbook, or maybe it was the DMG. From first edition D&D. There's also a gargoyle type thing, like a big winged demon, maybe. So even just, and this is mostly just in the caves. You've got different types of skeletons, zombies, and all that sort of stuff. Imps. Lots of different ways these things are reskinned and reused. Basically with palette choices, slight changes in palette choices because they didn't have a huge palette to deal with it at all anyway. But you have some like blue demons versus red demons and things like that down in the caves, and blue golems versus gray golems or something like that. You've got the sort of giant with the single horn coming out of its head as well.
Oof.
Yeah, those can be pretty brutal because they'll charge. The rhinos, I think I call them. So there's all of that, but we wanted to talk more about the differences in them from an AI perspective as you go, but also let's before we do that, let's talk about how well they're represented by their audio and their animation.
Yeah, I mean they I guess we haven't even we haven't talked too much. Well, maybe we did for Fallout. I'm trying to remember, but with sort of high poly 3D frame rendering of enemies, of basically, well, everything, really, the world,
right.
Enemies, all the artwork.
Right. I don't think we even talked about it then. We talked about the 3D conversations you'd have with the faces in Fallout.
Right, yeah. Fallout would have done the same thing with.
But yeah, anything that's at this particular time was starting to do this, do its full 3D model of a character. I mean, even Doom does this. Actually, they had clay models that they used I don't know if you've ever seen one of these, Tim, but they probably had one at LucasArts, but you had these sort of 3D modeling pens that were on they're on like robot arms.
Hmm.
You know
No,
what I'm talking about?
back in the day? You don't mean like?
Yeah. Back in the day, back when we were there.
No, I don't think I
Okay,
remember.
so yeah, let me describe what you would do to make something like for Doom. That's not how they did it for Diablo, but I want to talk about this other way of making things. Oh, this is actually how I think they did it for Fallout.
Oh,
You
for the
make a
face.
model, yeah,
Yeah.
for the heads. You make a model, an actual sculpted model of a thing in plasticine or clay or whatever, and then you make evenly spaced lines that are a mesh across that thing, and both going north to south and east to west, but in 3D, right? And then you take this device, which can read basically the IK of its own arm, like to be where a point is in space using it. So it's basically like a pointer on like a wrist, a lower arm, and an upper arm, like robot type thing. And then you just like you put it at every point where there's an intersection, and you record that point, and you make a real 3D point cloud from that. You've never
Whoa.
seen one of these?
No, no, I don't know how. I
Wow.
feel
Okay.
I feel like that technique must have just been getting out of vogue, maybe when I
Yeah, it's
got
possible. It
to
was a very narrow window. I mean, because there were a number of different ways to do this stuff, and nowadays that's what cameras do
yeah.
when you're using all these crazy camera setups, like we talked about with Tomb Raider. Is they're basically doing this for humans at a high resolution, right? Where they're really just getting all this 3D depth information, both from multiple perspective, but also literal cameras that have depth in them through, I guess, infrared. I don't know how the depth stuff works. But back in the day, you actually took this device and could move it. It was anchored, and then you'd move the point, and it would tell you like relative to where the anchor point was, where that point was in space that you were touching. When you click a button on your computer. I feel like we had one in the graphics lab at Penn.
Yeah,
And
that's like the 60s, right? I mean, that's pretty
yeah,
far back.
thanks. Thank you. Good. Um, yeah, so I mean that's how they did that's specifically how they put the Fallout heads in, or the
Hmm.
Fallout head, because I think it was mostly one head. I guess there were a couple, but definitely how they did the Doom stuff. Here they actually modeled them in 3D, and they didn't have to be as detailed because you were never going to see them up close.
Yeah. Well, but as a nice sort of from your point about that contraption that's making those for Doom, and so Doom was that 93? What?
93, yeah,
Yeah,
93.
93. Yeah. So that's, a few years back. But the progression that ended up happening, and Diablo's a good example of this, is CGI software started happening where modelers would model things, and this isn't just for isometric game. For this, it's for various things. Even sort of say, I don't know. This is a random example. I can't. Well, actually, Dark Forces did probably a fair amount of this for their characters, right? Because they were sprite based. The Stormtroopers specifically. But anyway, they would model them in CGI and then render them out into frames. And so when you see your character in Diablo walking around, you can very clearly see the frames because they weren't using very many frames to animate. But
Right.
it gave it a kind of a nice sort of detailed look, where the sort of the shoulder on the armor has a nice sort of curve to it, because it was rendered in a high poly way in the software and then rendered out for that frame. So it's a little bit of a trick to the eye there. And they did the same thing with a lot of elements in this, even the environments.
Right, and
But
of course they have to do it in 8 directions. So I was actually wrong about Doom. Doom didn't do this for them because, of course, everything was 2D. But they did something similar to what they did here,
rendered
because
it out.
it was just sprites in Doom, and I had forgotten that.
Yeah.
I might be thinking of Quake. Anyway, but I know they did this for Fallout for those 3D heads. But they used this device. Actually, in Doom, they just used a Lazy Susan with a model on it and took photos. So
Oh,
like they made,
seriously?
yeah, that's they made the models. That's why they look the way
So
they do.
that's for the 8 different directions is the
Right. And so here they're basically doing that with a 3D rendering package.
package, yeah.
Yeah, you're putting a thing, you're putting your virtual camera in a very specific spot, which is where, the viewpoint of the game. And you're rotating that thing for each pose, that it's gonna, the walk cycle or whatever. And actually you only, I guess, have to do four of those, maybe. I'd have to think about it. Is that true?
Side, top, no, it's 8. You're right. There's diagonals and then front, back, and then
Yeah,
profile.
no, yeah, it's all 8. Yeah, yeah, you
Yeah.
have to do all
Yeah.
8.
No, it's 8. And then one little detail that I forgot to write a note down, but as we're talking about this, I wanted to mention it. One detail that shows the sort of care and love that went into this game. When you were in town, the walk cycle is different because you are in a
Mm,
passive state and you cannot fight in town. There's no combat in town, so you hold your weapon differently. I think the stance might be a little different. So they did ultimately 16 for each character because of that. And to be honest, they didn't have to do that, right?
yeah,
You could just as easily walk around town in the same state as the dungeon, but to the point, kind of full circle to the first topic we had, it's kind of nice to have the character look like he's at ease in town, that he's got his weapon kind of to the side instead of like in a ready armed state. I noticed that today and wanted to make a comment on it. But anyway,
yeah. No, that's a good point. I'd forgotten about that. And actually, I didn't pick up on that. And that's a great observation. I do know. I mean, I do think they walk a little bit like they've got a stick up their behind when they're in town.
it's very, very simple. Yeah.
It's only maybe 3 frames.
Yeah.
Might be
It's 3
3
or 4
frames. Yeah,
something. It's
it's
not
a
much.
very small number of frames that repeat. Yeah, it's probably, a couple more than that, just because it's left side, right side, but are shifting, right, your arms. But yeah, it's not a lot of frames, but it's enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's and the reason why they walk a little bit stiffly is because they don't have lots of frames, right?
Yeah,
Um,
they just did the bare minimum to
yeah, well, they just can't afford the memory.
yeah.
And they actually do all the armor that way as well, because of course you get different armor on, and they basically render your body, then your armor and your helmet and your weapon as separate
Yeah.
things. I think that
Well,
they draw each frame.
so what I noticed for the sorcerer, at least, I don't know if you've noticed this for your character, if they definitely have sort of variations of that, but as you get the better armor, it changes. So I've had the same staff for quite a while, and when I got the plate, I put the plate on, and it changed the look of the staff when I put the plate on. So
Oh,
it's almost
interesting.
like they have a full body kind of classification of power, and so as you get
Hmm.
better armor, it kind of changes the look of the whole character rather than what they did with Diablo 2. They started doing is they would separate each quadrant out, like helmet and armor. I believe they started that in 2, and then weapon.
Interesting. Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
saw the visual changes because that was so effective in 1 when you saw that, oh, I got, like I just said, I got that plate armor for a sorcerer. And the concept, it's so cool to watch him now with plate armor running around.
Right.
He looks like a total badass. So, but yeah, maybe that was to your point, a savings for them to not render have so many variations. But it'd be interesting if you next time you play to see try on different armors and see if your sword changes or how it happens.
Yeah. I mean, it might not, just because the palette should be basically the same
Yeah.
for that. Well, but if I had a leather armor earlier, so maybe, yeah, I'll take a look. I didn't pick up on it. But that's the sort of thing I would probably miss, to be honest. I don't notice those things often.
Yeah,
Let
I love
Yeah.
that loot. So, but anyway,
Oh no, it's great that that's there. That's fantastic to me. It's just interesting that it changes the staff. Yeah, that's
yeah, and
just a weird thing.
I think it's just they have probably like 3 or 4 full character states based on the armor you have on, and it just kind of, you know, um, Well, I guess it would be based on the armor and the weapon. And so the weapons probably have 4 states that come with the armor. But if you have the same, say, dagger for 4 different types of armor, I think the dagger will change its look as
Oh,
you
okay.
put different armors on. But anyway, I don't know. That's just a theory. That's what
I mean,
happened with
that's a thing that's been so interesting in games. Even just, I mean, just talking about Blizzard and how things have changed with them. I mean, I don't know if it's true of World of Warcraft. Is it possible now to just basically choose things, um, for aesthetic reasons?
Oh my God, dude. They have a transmogrification system that they added in a couple expansions ago, few at this point. And what it allows you to do is they basically keep a catalog of every item you've ever found and the look of that item. It's literally a huge catalog. and and they show you all the ones you don't have as well. So if you're a collector, you can go back to
Oh,
the
uh-huh.
old content and find all the old stuff you don't have because you don't need the stats. You just want the look, and then you can basically transmogrify an item you currently have on to look like any of the items in your catalog. Um,
Right. So you can basically take the stats you want and put them with the look you'd like it to have.
yep, yep.
Right.
So you've
Yeah, I
obviously,
just thought that was a really interesting. It's been a really interesting change over time. Is the
yep,
degree to which we're just saying, you know what, we don't care. Like
no,
that's a cosmetic thing, and it's fine. I mean, you could argue in a multiplayer game like that, and I guess Diablo would count that way as well. That actually you shouldn't let that happen because for PVE or PvP rather, you need to be able to tell what stuff people have on.
yep. Well, they for many years actually that was their answer. They held the line for a long time, saying that they wanted it to be clear what people were wearing because of that. And I don't know if Lord of the Rings Online was the first ones to do it, but that was the one I remember where they actually added that kind of system first, I think. And then it was so successful that I think maybe WoW added it afterwards and they just basically broke down. But they were trying to maintain that, oh, you see those shoulders, you know what that person's wearing.
Right.
Ultimately, in PvP, it doesn't end up making that much difference. To be honest, I think they clamp things anyway. But Diablo doesn't really have PvP per se in the same way, so it's not as big a deal. But I don't know if they have a sort of transmogrification thing in Diablo though.
No, no, I don't think they ever have. But I just meant looking at the same studio, um, the way that we've looked at loot and like the appearance of it over time.
Mm-hmm.
At one time it was, well, everybody looks the same regardless of what they have on because we just don't have the rendering technology or the disk space often. Um, in Diablo, you're seeing that shift where we're doing more of that, but maybe we haven't gone quite all the way to having every weapon or armor type, um, recognized or what have you, etc. So I'm just
Yeah,
just interesting to look at that change over time.
yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, people letting go more and more of that. But coming kind of back to the enemy stuff, which we we got off on a good tangent with the rendering. The reason that I brought up the rendering topic is the enemies. To your point, they basically have a bunch of archetypes that they are using this sort of similar AI and maybe some similar animation cycles and things, but then change the models or even just colors or even just sort of projectiles, and they just start sort of mixing and matching that stuff. And similarly to where when we were talking about the all the variations of the weapons and the gear, sort of like the statistical based design where you have the such and such of the such and such, and changing just the stats of things, and so you can make very very long loot table of all of the different gear. They're doing similar stuff with the enemies in that they will have some that are immune to fire or resistant to fire, some that are resistant to electricity, and then they will change the colors of those, and then they will change what projectile they're shooting at you. So you have to react. And so there's this very interesting mixing and matching, which I'd love to know sometime how they sort of how the encounter design worked, in that how they would basically seed combinations of different characters to make interesting, combat situations where you have like ranged enemies shooting this type of damage and then charging enemies that are this kind of immunity. You know what I mean? So you're constantly have to kind of micromanage all that stuff. Um, have you had any of those experiences in the caves?
For me, less of that, just because my character is go up and whack the thing. So there's a lot less of that for me, really, most of the time. I mean, there have been times where I specifically bought some armor because I was like, oh, I know there's some lightning guys down there. Let me get this thing that has more lightning resistance.
Right. Yeah.
But
I
that's
mean,
been really the only big difference.
well, yeah. One of the things that, for me, that with the sorcerer specifically, that I'm still kind of mixed on is, and I mentioned this last episode, is the spell swapping stuff. And
Right.
what
Yeah.
what ended up happening to me in the caves that, that I don't know. I guess there's a side of me that likes it, but I really get frustrated at times. And that's why I kind of wanted to, what I mentioned earlier about sort of how they did the encounter makeup sort of design, the combos, because I have that demon kind of character that's shooting lightning from a distance, and the lightning kind of goes, through multiple enemies and hits you multiple times. Then I have those charging rhino things, and then I have these other sort of fleshy demon things, flesh guys that are immune to fire, and
Oh, are they the
then
red ones?
yeah, red ones. And
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
that tells me they're, you can see the little pop up for them what they're immune to as well usually, but the
Right.
red
Right.
usually means that fire won't work on them. And then occasionally the knights will come in too, and those guys are immune to electricity, or not immune, but they have a resistance.
Right.
So basically, when I have those guys all coming at me, um, and the rhinos fire is the best for the rhinos I've found, at least for my playthrough. And so I'm having to swap between firebolt, lightning, and heal, all while running away. And the interface for swapping is not great, but because of that, if I want to play the most effectively to maximize my use of mana, I really need to be, sort of basically plate spinning and min maxing those resistances. Um,
So
and
you
of
haven't
course,
you haven't chosen to use your staff to do that? Oh no, I guess you still have to
you
switch.
still only get
You still have
one.
to, right? You have to switch
Yeah,
the spell type though. You have to be like, oh, cast from my staff, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'd
Oh,
forgotten
and
that. Yeah.
as a quick aside on the staff thing, one of the reasons I hate the staff system, which I just stopped using the staves for firing, is when you recharge your staves, the number of charges go down every time. So
They
that's
have. Yeah.
yeah, that's the staves
But you can get
version
them
of Druid.
recharged in town.
They still are diminished though, right? You can't get them fully recharged.
Oh, I thought you could. Although I didn't play my sorcerer very much, so I don't. I mean, I think
No,
no. I thought that they would recharge the same way as the durability does, because the durability doesn't decrease, does it? In town?
I don't think so. I don't remember actually. No, I don't think durability does. I thought I
Huh.
tested that out though. You might be right, but I'll have to test that
I
out.
have not played the sorcerer enough to have
Yeah,
noticed.
yeah.
So
I just stopped using it, but anyway, just sort of like just the micromanaging of that is pretty rough for the sorcerer when you're
yeah.
in. And I haven't upped my vitality that much, which may or may not be a mistake. I don't even know if I could have kept up with it, and so I really can't let anything get. I'm a couple hits and I'm down. 3 or 4 hits from these enemies. I was fine on the previous in the catacombs, but here I've really found, because what a lot of them have those range attacks, but then they also rush in at you and they have these big claw attacks, and so.
Right. Right.
But what ended up happening to me, I alluded to it earlier, and then I'll pass it over to you. But what had happened to me with that mini boss? One of the named knights was immune to fire and lightning, and those are my two main attacks. And I didn't even have any spells otherwise, so I was kind of like, what? am I gonna do? And so I had to get creative, and I used, which I hadn't used very much so far. I had to use Stone Curse, and I would freeze him, or turn him to stone, and then just hit him with my
The
staff,
stick, yeah.
and then turn him to stone, and then hit him with my staff, and then return him. So it took forever, but I did eventually get him. But otherwise, if I hadn't done that, if I didn't have Stone Curse, I literally would not have been able to kill that guy. So the pros and cons of a systemic programmatic procedural system.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, probably how that stuff is done, because there doesn't tend to be a lot of overlap on any given level between, they basically seem to come from a number of different types of things that you run into. And there's not like they end up being sort of a smattering of different types of things usually.
When overlap, you mean like
the resistances, like they're
right.
different resistances for different things.
Yep.
And I think they probably just pull that out of a bag. Like, oh, I picked out lightning, oh, okay, nobody else can have lightning resistance. This one has it.
Right. So they make once they choose one from the table, then the rest
it's not
of them
going to come up again.
Yeah.
The other ones get from a diminished table, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you rolled that again? Reroll, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
if you reroll twice and you don't get something, you just get nothing. Like if you roll something that's been zeroed out twice, then you just get nothing. That's pretty common in D&D, actually. Oh, you rolled the same thing again? Sorry, nothing for you. It's a pretty common RPG approach for that stuff. Like if you're going to do some bonus, like, oh, I got a +1, you roll and you get a +1 again. It's like, oh, sorry, no additional bonus. You don't also get soul stealing or whatever. Yeah, that would be my guess. I mean, for me, the funny thing has been a lot of these critters, like I said, there are AI differences as you go down, and they don't flee as much as on earlier levels when you kill something.
Mm-hmm.
And they move a little bit more quickly to you. Some of them charge you. Those rhinos charge you, obviously. So I've gotten into situations multiple times where I just get surrounded.
Right.
And the tough thing for me there is my hit recovery is often not quite good enough that I'm getting in a lot of hits, especially when I'm surrounded. I might be getting in a few. So I'm just going through potions like crazy. And I get to the point where it's like, oh, I've used all 8 from my potion bar. So now I open the inventory with the I key, and I'm like clicking on the left side of the screen and then swinging over and trying to right click on something quickly and go back. And I've had that work out. Most of the time it does not. So I also have to flee sometimes. I'm just like, oh no, I can't get surrounded by this many dudes. I have to go find a corner that I can hide around so that I won't fight more than 3, really. I might get more from spells, but I won't have more than 3 that are directly in contact with me. I'll just kind of tuck myself into a little corner, hopefully isolated from spell attacks. But it's difficult at times.
Yeah, I started dying a lot more on the caves than before, and saves coming a lot more too, to be honest.
Yep,
I'll creep forward a little bit, basically kind of trigger the AI and then kind of deal with a few, or find bottlenecks or whatever. You mentioned a small thing there that I think is worth talking a little, just kind of drilling into a tiny bit. The fact that you can open your inventory and still play.
Yeah.
That's another critical, in fact, all of the menu panes are that way. It's another critical aspect of a real-time action game like this that wasn't the case in other RPGs up to this. They needed to find a solution to that. And so it takes half the screen, renders it on the other side as you have those open. Of course, if you open 2 of them, then you can't see anything. But if you can open your inventory and play at the same time, that's kind of a big deal.
It would be impossible to do the multiplayer with that system.
Yes, no, it was required for that, though you can pause single player. So they could have paused, but they chose not to, which I think
was wise. I mean, it keeps the pressure on you.
It's good.
There are, we've mentioned the Souls games here probably every other episode, and you can't pause those games, and which I'm not crazy about for quality of life reasons, but I get it. I also get it that they're trying for a certain aesthetic, and if that aesthetic doesn't fit your life, maybe it's not the game for you. But yeah, the same thing is going on here. Although it does have, you can always pause a single player game at any point as well. But yeah, that was a great moment when I got through. I had one of the named bosses chasing after me, and a horde of other things, and managed to get through that with my inventory pane open. And just like swinging over to right click very quickly, and because I didn't have time to drag and drop stuff to my bar. So it was very like click, click, click. Oh, potion, click, 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 potion, kind of moment. But yes, I've also been save scumming a lot more. And I kind of have gotten into the habit of like, okay, I just cleared out a bunch of guys. I better just save. Especially as I get to like levels 11 and 12. So,
which is a little dangerous because of the save system. It's not meant to, because of the multiplayer kind of focus. It's not really, you could save in a bad state.
yep. Oh yeah.
There's only one save. So,
but it's normal. Normally I figure I can drop a town portal. There was a time where I was getting chased by tons of stuff, and I just dropped a town portal. I'm just going to go back, and run back into town and fill up my bar again. And then I have the option of either coming back through the portal or climbing back down here through the regular stairs and stuff. So that's another thing you can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that was many of our topics, right?
It was most of our topics. I wanted to touch on a couple of things that came in from the they weren't sort of long drawn out email feedback or whatever. But to one of your points last time, we had mentioned how often the game that does a thing particularly well is the one that wins history, sort of how we talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
We had feedback via Twitter from Dan Smith and quote unquote an opinion haver who were telling us about I think the TurboGrafx / PC Engine game called Dungeon Explorer and Operation Winback on the Nintendo 64. Neither of these games that I had heard of, and that Operation Winback there was a cover shooter. And yeah, we freely admit that there are probably antecedents to some of the gameplay in games that we play that we may not be aware of. And this is touching on hearing from somebody who wrote in last week about Ultima 8, which I did try a bit. And boy, that is a very, very clunky approach to this same sort of idea, because it falls down with the whole Ultima. So with Ultima games, typically everything you can do is a different key or button. And that is not what you want when you're using the mouse. Like, oh, I got to remember to double click or to move the mouse this far away, to use the right click versus the left click. I mean, it's a lot in that game. It's funny because at the same time there was simplifications in games, even on the Nintendo 64, Ocarina of Time, where they were doing single button inputs for all the different things you could do, and it was just contextual. And the PC games were not necessarily keeping up with that. Although I guess Ocarina is pretty far after Ultima 8, so I can't really blame Ultima 8 on that. Anyway,
I think that's a good example of, or it's a good point about how we often talk about PCs kind of from a legacy perspective, PC games kind of, coming, creating a lot of foundational aspects that console borrowed from, but there are definitely many times when consoles influence PCs, to your point about contextual, right? Like just because we have this keyboard doesn't mean you need to use all the keys. And luckily, I think the forced innovation on console controls, ends up being shared by PC over time as well, which is
great. I mean, absolutely. You look at today, and any number of games, are supporting a controller on the PC anyway. Even things that, I mean, I remember back in the day having arguments about, well, you'd never be able to play, you mentioned this last week, you never play a first-person shooter on a console, and things like that. Anyway, the point I wanted to bring up about that is that the value in playing some of these games that aren't sort of on the main track of what everyone is playing, the big successes, the critical darlings, might be valuable for a designer as well. For example, Operation Winback or Dungeon Explorer, which is sort of a little bit more gauntlet, I think, than it is like Diablo, from what I could tell from the video I watched. But you might pick up an idea as a designer, something that hasn't really found its best expression yet, and maybe you will have the opportunity to make the Gears of War cover shooter game that people remember as the thing with the cover, versus Diablo with the real time role playing game, action RPG, clickfest, or whatever else we've brought up. So, I know you and I don't have as much time to play widely as we used to, but there's value in it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I've used this example. I think I brought this up on the podcast in some previous episodes. Or some series. I don't remember when though, but it's my ultimate example of this. And that's Trespasser, a game called Trespasser that most people probably haven't played, maybe heard of, a little bit of an infamous game, but as an example,
I think you talked about it when we talked about Deus Ex.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, that makes sense. But I use that as an example because, and I don't want to quote him here because I don't remember exactly what he said, but Clint Hawking had referenced that game for Far Cry 2 as being a somewhat of a, at least a minor influence, because there's some basically Trespasser was ahead of its time and just did some things very poorly, but was trying to do things that would definitely inspire people who were trying to think about games in that way. So yeah, that's always my example, my go-to example for, you never know where you're going to find some insights.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think too of Richard LaMarchand, who was the lead designer on Uncharted 2 and maybe a co-lead designer on Uncharted 1. I can't remember Richard's specific credits on that series. You look him up. He's a smart guy. He talked about in Uncharted 2 some of the sections that were a little bit quieter, in particular the Nepalese village, being influenced by more meditative independent games that he was playing at the time, things like Dear Esther, which is a walking simulator, or what have you, that had and I'm sure there was something else too. I'd have to go back and watch his talk at GDC some years ago. But going and finding things that AAA wasn't doing and finding a way to incorporate it into his game and kind of borrowing those ideas, stealing really. But they say you steal like an artist when you actually, everybody thinks of it as yours, right? So I would say that that's what happened with the cover shooter and with the real-time combat of Diablo. They may not have started there, but they certainly own it, and that kind of speaks to your winning as well. That was the thing you used to say too at LucasArts, was that we should also play our failures for the same reason.
Yeah. The to your point about contextualization, Diablo is a good example of, you just mentioned sort of the ClickFest, and then you talked about Ultima 8 and sort of how everything is discrete inputs. But one of the innovations that they did with Diablo, this game we're playing, is that that one mouse button does kind of everything. You pick up things with it, you fire with it, you move with it, you click on enemies with it, you use you can use hotkeys, but you can also use it for menus. So sort of a one-stop shop. And that at the time, with Ultima 8 being a good example of the counter, that wasn't a common thing, especially on the PC.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they just simplified. That's the way to go. So says Thoreau. And then I guess the last thing I want to touch on before we turn to feedback is that we did also hear from a bunch of folks via Twitter and email. And then maybe 24 hours later, I also heard from Tim about this. The good old games version of Diablo is now available. I had tweeted out via the Dev Game Club Twitter that the GOG version's multiplayer may have security issues. Nothing specific is called out. It just pointed out that back in the day, we didn't really have a lot of security around our network multiplayer, and this would probably require you to open some ports on your
Gross.
yeah, and it's just scary. And yeah, it's a bit of a tricky thing, and so just be aware of that. We're probably still going to play via a VPN, so that'll put Tim on my network. We're going to try to do that, hopefully for next episode, I guess. We'll try to figure that out. We have to look at schedule, but yeah, kind of a thing to be aware of. But that version is up now, and it has a lot of quality of life improvements, and will just run. It'll just work on your machine. You won't have to do anything crazy. Go find a specific DLL or a patch or whatever. It should just work. Unlike the archive.org version, which was not hard to get working, but did require a little bit of fiddling.
What are the chances that popped up while we were doing this? That's just
those are pretty long odds. Yeah.
I
want to believe that there's either a GOG or a Blizzard employee somewhere.
When
you know what? They heard us talking about what we were going to do and get it from archive.org. They're like, oh man, there's 2,000 customers right there.
Right. Yeah. When you had announced that it was on archive.org, it was like, huh. Yeah. Well, somebody might be listening. Maybe they didn't know that it was on archive.org.
No, I think they did actually. I think Blizzard specifically put it there, so it's not unknown. But Blizzard basically said we're not hosting it anymore. You can't buy it from us anymore, because they don't want to deal with the headache of trying to support people who are having trouble getting it to run on anything later than Windows, whatever XP. So
I will say though, this isn't a weird move because there is no other Blizzard product on another storefront like this. So
correct,
when I read this, I was pretty intrigued by how this would have come to pass.
I guess technically Hearthstone is available via the Apple Store.
Yeah, fair enough.
But generally speaking, if it plays on a PC, you have to buy it through Blizzard.net.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. So for folks who, you got an option now.
Yep. Yeah. If you were having trouble following along, no longer do you have an issue. You should be able to play it via GOG. Okay, let's turn now to email. We didn't have any reviews this week. I always want to just shout out that we love to have reviews via the Apple Podcasts app. That sort of infrastructure there, or really whatever store supports. If you're on something else, if you want to go ahead and give us a review there, that helps us reach people. We only get new people to the podcast via word of mouth. We don't do any advertising. This is a whole side fun thing that we do. So we appreciate every rating and review. I think we're worth 5 stars, so hopefully you do too. In any case, Tim, we have a few emails this time to devgameclub@gmail.com. Why don't you take the first one?
Subject is Diablo 2 to 3 health potion change from Andrew Henninger. Henninger?
Yeah, probably.
Hey, DGC. I had a thought after listening to the last email about the health potion change from D2 to D3. I like the change from having to stock up on inventory potions to having enemies drop the health orbs. I feel like it puts an incentive on constant combat and action, and having the one potion on cooldown there is a backup. I've played a ton of Diablo 2 and 3 and don't feel like there's much downtime, and never a need to go back to town to stock up on potions if I have to redo a failed boss fight in 3. Thanks for the casts, Andrew.
Yeah, so we actually touched on that one a lot this episode anyway, because we talked about the sort of rhythm and downtime. If that's not what you want, then maybe that's not for you. Because you pointing that out, I was like, oh yeah, that's actually kind of nice for me personally. But that's not to everyone's taste. I actually didn't remember the specifics of Diablo 3, so I might have spoken it a little too strongly about it. And I'm, all of this kind of came rushing back with Diablo, so.
it's just another, yeah, I mean, it's he makes a good point. It's twofold. It's another way for them to another variable for them to tune and balance by having health drop off of enemies. And then two, to his point, probably a pretty intentional choice for them to essentially allow you to spend, you basically have to go back to town less often, right? And
Right.
so, though, as I said, there is a pacing, in my opinion, a pacing um, positive there by having to go back to town. It is taking you out of the action, right? So some people definitely would see it as a if there's too many visits to town, if they would see it as a, as a negative. So I still think you need some, but if you want to elongate that time in a dungeon, then that's a cool solution to, to have that loop change a little bit. So it makes
Mhm.
sense for, and I would say three, though three can get hard, I would say three is a much more approachable version of the games. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true as well. So maybe the stress level isn't as high anyway, so there's not as much of a need to give a break.
yeah,
So there's that too. Um, yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, they certainly could have with Diablo have tuned it so that more potions were just dropped from enemies. I mean, they had that option,
yeah,
and it's a pretty rare drop. It happens, but it's not. They could have made that very frequent, and they clearly chose not to. So, all
I
right.
think
So I have. I mean, I think that ties actually into multiplayer as well. So, because there's interesting things that happen when it's like, well, are we all going to go back to town? No, I'll just hang out down here. I'll wait for you guys, or
yeah,
whatever. So
yeah.
I'll clear out a little bit, and next thing you know, oh no, no, you're hearing in your headphones. So you were going to say,
Oh, I was going to say that, not necessarily saying that to compare the two to each other, but Diablo 2 still has a player base for people who, I think it's still a pretty, for such an old game, I think it's still a pretty robust community. So, tends to be a game that people stick with if they like the mechanics, like in that old style. But yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah, remarkable. It's remarkable to say. All right, we have an email here from Jamie, either Zusek or Zuchek. I'm not sure which. I apologize. Into the Pokeverse. Hi, Brett and Tim. My two sons and I are already listening through your Pokemon Red Blue series for the second time. When younger, they were deep into playing and collecting Pokemon trading cards. They also tried a few of the video games, but did not get too into them. Personally, I've been a JRPG fan since the NES, and have played through every mainline Final Fantasy, including 11 and 14 online, but never really checked out the Pokemon video games until now. When we first listened through your Red Blue podcast, it rekindled an interest in the video games, and three of us started playing Fire Red and Leaf Green, which are the remakes of Red Blue on the Game Boy Advance. I fired up my trusty GBA SP for the first time in over a decade and picked up two more for them, as well as three of the wireless adapters to allow us to trade and battle with each
Whoa,
other.
that's awesome.
Yeah, pretty amazing. We have quickly become frenzied Pokemon addicts, discussing party composition, puzzle navigation, and the cuteness of new catches over dinner, much to the chagrin of my disinterested yet highly accommodating and, may I add, lovely wife. I don't think she listens, Jamie, so you probably don't have to really overdo it there. Anyway, the three of us plan to take on the Elite Four together this weekend and then proceed to catch the legendary Pokemon.
That
Announcement.
is
Yeah.
amazing.
The announcement of the forthcoming 8th generation Pokemon Sword and Shield games has prompted us to plan a full sequential by region playthrough with Heart Gold and Soul Silver up next. I've discovered one secret to keeping a strong bond with my boys, firmly in teen tweenhood, is giving them the same game and having me playing the odd one out to ensure I am in constant demand for trading. Perfect. Uh,
Suggestion for any
yeah,
father who's
any other dads out there who are looking for a way to keep themselves connected with their kids. Anyway, thanks for the educational, entertaining, and inspiring podcast. I think you managed to chart the course for our next year plus of video game play. From Jamie, he says that is his real name.
That's
Although who knows,
great.
given my pronunciation. Yeah, I thought that was pretty terrific and heartwarming. I love the I love that I play this one and they both get a copy of this other one. They have to come to me to get their I don't know,
Yeah,
legendaries or whatever. That's pretty awesome.
that's
Uh, yeah.
it's cool to know that we got him, rekindled that interest. Pokemon is a little bit of its own version of JRPG that now that I understand them better, and I appreciate that about it. By the way, Sword and Shield look. Did you look at any of that stuff? It looks
Oh yeah.
pretty cool.
Oh yeah. You're going to be a
the
Sobble player, aren't you?
I think I saw that over Twitter. Yeah. Yes, definitely. That's the plant one, right?
That's the plant one, yes.
Yeah,
The one that
course.
looks like it's going to cry.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Until he beats the you know what out of you.
Sure, whatever.
Uh-huh.
I'll be playing the fire type. So
Of course.
Of
Yep.
course.
Next one.
Yeah, let's go ahead and hit that next one.
Diablo. Subject is Diablo 1 Sorcerer Hints from Warren Linham Church. Hint for playing a sorcerer. You can start a new game with the same character and keep the same equipment level, spells, etc. You will lose any items on the ground in town, though. This resets the dungeon, and you can basically use it to farm spells in the first 8 levels where there are a lot of bookcases. Since you are over leveled, you can tear through them pretty quickly. Honestly, clearing out an early dungeon room with a bazillion charge bolts in retrospect reminds me a lot of the over-the-top stuff you can do in Diablo 2 and 3. I was never able to get very far as a sorcerer until I figured that out. I suspect that's a big part of why they moved to skill trees in the sequels. Warren Linham Church, if that is your real name. Yeah, I didn't know you could start over. I mean, I'm playing single player. You may still be able to do that in single player.
Yes, you can. You can start a new game with
the same character.
With the same character. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That actually makes a lot of sense because now that I think about it, I haven't seen one bookcase in in the caves. Though maybe
no, they just look at the shadows on the wall in the cave.
Yeah.
It's
right.
a Plato reference for you. There you go.
No, didn't get it.
Okay.
But I did have a few books drop off of enemies.
They do, yeah. It's pretty rare though compared to how many bookcases there are.
Yeah, but that's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm finding it pretty. The caves definitely scared me a bit, but once I got the rhythm of things, I think I might be okay. I don't think I need to power level too much. But then again, if I start over, I'd have to start all the way over, right? I can't go power level him and then finish the save. It's just a whole nother game. So
correct. Yeah, you would be just continuing and finishing some other game.
Yeah, I've already started over once, which to his point, if I had known that, maybe I would
could have just continued with the same.
Yeah, I should have continued that character. But I kind of wanted to play from scratch and play as the intended way, just to see how the balancing was going to be for the sorcerer, just to see how hard it was going to be. So I'm ultimately glad I did it this way, but it's nice to know. Thank you, Warren.
Yeah, no, it's good to know that. I mean, we talked a little bit about how you would pick the difficult character on System Shock 2 as well, and a lot of games don't have that facility where the character is separate from the instantiation of the game.
No.
That's a pretty rare thing, especially at this time. And it's probably, again, not the first time, but again, it's something you think about when you think about Diablo, is having a character that is separate from the game.
That's a good point.
Especially, obviously, for multiplayer. So
yeah, the concept of a profile character versus a save character. That's a really good point. Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. Also, I want to echo his point about Charge Bolt, because I have so much mana and my Charge Bolt is pretty high level. There is nothing like just spamming Charge Bolt through a dungeon and through rooms, because it bounces around. I mean, you probably have 20 plus charge bolts all out there, and it's really gratifying because things are just dying. You can't even see them; they're not even on the screen.
You just hear them. You hear the goat go.
Yeah, it's great.
And hopefully something drops. And ching.
Yeah, But then you have to go find it. Ugh.
Then you have to hunt it down, and you miss it because it's the anvil and it's black, and you just walk away.
Yeah.
There are some limitations to their palette, that's for sure. Yeah, and we talked about that last time.
Well, in 2, I believe they added in the control feature where you hold control down and anything you can pick up is highlighted. So
that's correct. Yeah, they added that later. But that was definitely not in this one.
no.
And I'm not sure how they did that. I have to look at that. There's probably like an alpha value or something like that in the palette. Or a specific color that is basically the outline color that's clear. Okay. I think that's all we've got for this time. We are, of course, going to finish this game and hopefully play some multiplayer for next week. Then we'll have to
We're going to do both
figure out
for
our
next week?
schedules. Yeah, why not?
Okay.
How long did it take you to get through the caves?
Couple hours maybe.
Yeah, so not too bad.
Yeah, that's true. I guess there wouldn't be enough to do a full episode just on multiplayer. You're probably right.
Yeah, I don't think there's a ton added. I mean, if we were going to really deep dive and play a ton of it and see how it changes over a lot of time, that might be different.
Yeah, that's like a lot of
that's a big investment. But we'll be able to talk about the differences in difficulty because I think that does have some scaling on it and things like that. So it'll be interesting to at least touch on it and talk about the sort of real time nature of that world, and that's very different for RPGs at the time as well.
Some good stories from memories from playing multiplayer in this game.
For sure.
And no complete promises, but we are on track for having a guest as well. So it's looking promising.
Yeah, looking good for that as well. So hopefully that'll all work out. In the meantime, you can find the podcast on Twitter at DevGameClub. As I mentioned, we had a few things pointed out to us there, as well as a lot of people pointing out different reporting on the fact that Diablo is coming to GOG. You can also find my co-host there at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Some personal stuff in my life has made it a little bit erratic for me to be streaming this past, 10 days or so. But when I do stream, you can find me at twitch.tv/Brett Duville. Thanks so much for listening this week, and have fun playing games. Good night.
Good night.